break, and then there's more. I mean, party goes till 10 o'clock. So it's been instructed to tell you to dip in and dip out as makes sense for you. So, you know, I usually, any of you packing for class know I tend to improvise more than I should. But when it comes to this, I usually write things out because I want to be precise and I want to spend time crafting something that honors how much work people put into their thesis. It's not a joke what people do. And it never ceases to amaze me how much the goodness that you bring to the field with what you learn. I'm a thesis advisor because I learn from you all. So it's super exciting to me when I get to be part of something like this. So here are my written words of introduction, okay? Well, now this feels weird. Welcome, everyone. I'm glad you could make it this evening. My name is Chris Evans. I'm an adjunct instructor here at Smith, where I teach clinical practice and comparative theories courses. In the interest of allowing as much time as possible with the rich material, activities, and discussions are presented tonight, I want to briefly review our agenda and then introduce Leah and Kat. The structure of our time is going to be as follows. Each of our speakers are going to take about 20 minutes to summarize the results of their hard work over the past year. Following their presentations, Kat, are you going first? You're going. Okay, Leah will. Leah is going to talk for fun. Wait, I lost my place. Each of them are going to take 20 minutes, and then following our presentations, Kat is going to lead us in some experiential exercises. And then the remainder of our time is going to be devoted to asking you as a community to reflect together on the implications of Leah and Kat's thoughtful research in terms of the future it can have on social work education at Smith. On a personal note, I want to say what a deep honor it is for me to be here tonight. I know Leah and Kat from our interactions as co-learners in the classroom. To be clear, I had the good fortune of finding them on my rosters over various courses I teach. As always, I spent hours in preparation for these courses in hopes that I would be able to deliver a rich learning experience for students. This is how my job title reads in a nutshell: teach the students. Right? But what strikes me most each summer is the ways in which the students, and that includes all of you, in which all of you teach me. You stretch me, you motivate me, and most of all, you renew my hope, which is why I drive across country every summer to make this my home for 3 months. This is especially true with Leah and Kat. This is where I get personal. I remember sitting in an empty classroom with Leah in our first year practice class, where she modeled to me professional vulnerability, and she shared with me where she was in her growth trajectory, where it hurt in her growth trajectory, what made her sad in the world, and what fueled her passion for this work. In the vernacular of the theories I teach, I saw how she has productively sublimated this energy to produce invaluable work that she's going to share with us tonight. I remember Kat, where are you? I remember Kat gently and boldly approaching me on class break after one of my passionate tangents to which I am prone. They appreciated my efforts and offered me vital feedback on the ways in which my well-intentioned words may have landed in ways I clearly had not foreseen. Humbled, I embraced their feedback, and I returned after the break to reflect with the class on what I had said and how it may have impacted people. I hope Kat knows that my attempt at accountability and repair was inspired by their generous engagement with me. And here all of you are tonight with an opportunity to engage with the same sort of earnest and mutual engagement that I see these two bring to their work. So let me tell you a little bit more specifically about each of them. Lea Broh. Leah's here to engage us in dialogue with her thesis entitled Instructor Perspectives on Teaching Race and Racism to White MSW Students. Before coming to Smith, Leah worked for 5 years doing immigration and legal services, and later as a case manager with survivors of gender-related violence in New York City. After graduation, she plans to continue doing trauma and anti-racism work. You know, I often ask them to tell me something that nobody knows about them, right, as part of this process. And what I learned about Leah is that she sews and knits, but I actually cut and paste her words because I like what she said. She said, I spend all day talking with people about the violence humans and I commit. It feels really necessary to remember that humans and I can create joy and beauty too, and making tangible and useful things helps me to reconnect with that. And let me just say, she makes tangible and useful things, one of which still lives on my bookshelf in a transitional object she graciously gave me. Okay? All right, Kat. Kat is going to talk to us about antidotes to white fragility, and I love the title, Antidotes. I've been looking for the answers. Right? Antidotes to white fragility on teaching race and racism to white MSW students. Kat has lived in the San Francisco Bay Area since 2003. They had the privilege of supporting the Black Lives Matter movement in Oakland these past 2 years and are looking forward to continuing to collaborate with their communities for racial justice after graduation. I don't think I've ever seen anybody who lives what they say they believe the way Kat does. Right? Their clinical work aspires to emphasize somatic and narrative therapy approaches to healing relational and sociocultural trauma. Kat believes that having fun can be an act of resistance. Yeah. And you're likely to find them climbing trees, making mediocre art, being a general goofball, whenever it's possible. So these are two pretty fabulous people that are behind some pretty fabulous work. So without any more talking, please welcome.
This is my first year practice professor, so this feels kind of nicely full circle. So, I'm going to go as quick as I can through some stuff that I've been writing about, thinking about, reading about, and probably talking with many of you about this year. I'm going to try and keep a timer for myself. So the full title of my thesis is very long. It is, you have to know whether or not you can really compassionately hold white folks. Perspectives of instructors on white MSW student engagement with race and racism course material. The first part is a quote from one of the people I interviewed. So just to kind of frame what we're talking about, I'll talk more about the research itself, but this is a white identified professor talking about how she frames the class that she teaches on race and racism and structural oppression in general to her white students. She says, I don't think there's a magic super sensitivity or a magic experience. I think it's really how do we create an environment where somebody makes room to be willing to acknowledge racism. Because for me at least, the minute that room is made, it's like there's an elephant that is polka dotted, that has been sitting in the room with me this entire time. And somehow I had polka dotted wallpaper and it blended and I didn't see it or something, but it's everywhere. Real quick about sort of my positionality and motivation for doing this research. I am a white MSW student. This is a thesis. I don't know quite what that word is, but I wanted to learn more about myself and learn more about ways that I've seen myself behave in classrooms, in relationships in my past, with clients, in field placement, probably with many of you in this room. With issues around race and racism and trying to understand better what's happening with white people and white social work students in particular when we're coming face to face with knowledge, information, or challenges that relate to race and racism. So I see this as part of an ongoing pursuit of knowledge for myself and trying to really marry it with social justice activism and engagement. This is a map of the New York City subway system. The reason this is relevant is that, as many of you know, my thesis is very long. I think it was the longest of our class. Part of why that happened is that I had a 2-hour commute each way to field placement this past year. So I did all of my thesis reading on the subway, where I had to go from basically the bottom of the map to above the top of the map. So I'm going to touch on some of it, but I could talk for hours about this. So if you want to be talked at, come find me. So briefly, my conceptual overview. When I'm talking about race, what I'm talking about is social construction. It's an ideological set of socially created categories based on real and perceived physical attributes and ancestry. It determines access to power and resources, and it also shapes people's sense of self, identity, options, and community. When I'm talking about racism, I'm talking about a system of laws, social structures, cultural norms, institutional and individual behaviors that hold together the racial system, and racism both creates and reproduces structures of dominance. So a bit about whiteness. One way of thinking about whiteness is as a system. So whiteness historically was created by a set of laws that basically defined who was not white. People who were not white were subject to state surveillance, subject to state violence. People who were white were not. So whiteness, in its history and as currently existing, is an exclusive system. It's defined by who's outside and who's inside. It's also a system of domination and exploitation. It was created to privilege people identified as white over people identified as non-white, and to exploit non-white people for the benefit of white people. I'm also thinking about whiteness intrapsychically and interpersonally as a habit. When I say a habit, I mean a set of predispositions of how to be, act, interact, perceive the world that are part of a person in a way that's both stable and changing, depending on context, depending on experience. And part of what this does is it gives us access to think about why and how it is that under sort of contemporary systems of racism, which is often grounded in colorblindness, white people can have really great intentions, really oppose racism, oppose white supremacy, and still act in ways that are perpetuating racism and white supremacy. So a quote that I liked is, the racism of years ago lives on in the unconscious desires, fears, and beliefs of well-intentioned white people today. Thinking more about whiteness as a habit, I'm not going to go into these in too much depth, but these are kind of some of the elements of what I see as internalized habits of whiteness. In particular, one that I found sort of interesting to think about is the idea of purity. And so we hear about this with sort of white supremacists, right? Who want to protect whiteness from like contamination or invasion is kind of how it's often talked about. I think that in more progressive spaces, often the way that it shows up is white people wanting to be pure of racism. So not to be contaminated or infected in some way by racism, as if that's a possible thing that we could do. What happens when white people engage with and confront race and racism? So this is from a book called The Racial Contract by Charles Mills. Mills writes that white misunderstanding, misrepresentation, evasion, and self-deception on matters related to race are among the most pervasive mental phenomena of the past few hundred years. A cognitive and moral economy psychically required for conquest, colonization, and enslavement. So white people have committed a whole hell of a lot of violence over the past few centuries. In order to sort of psychically be able to do that, we have blocked ourselves from seeing some of the ways that the world works, and we've created the world to work. Why is this relevant to social work practice? I really hope that that is self-evident. In particular, something that I was struck by is this last quote is from a report on institutional racism put out by the NASW in 2007. And it specifically calls on white social workers to acknowledge white privilege and to take leadership in engaging with our peers in understanding white privilege and white supremacy. In reality, research shows that white social workers hold similarly racist beliefs as other white people in the US. So research has found a colorblind approach among white social workers who are unaware of white privilege or the impact of race and might treat people without attending to the impacts of race, which makes the problem individual rather than structural, right? And another study found that white social workers supported equality for people of color in their workplaces, but didn't support something like affirmative action or other measures that would be necessary to actually make that equality happen. Relevance to social work education. The Council on Social Work Education requires that social work schools teach students to understand the forms and mechanisms of oppression and discrimination. This is required for accreditation, so all schools have to do this. This is the most recent standards put out by the CSWE in 2015. Again, in reality, this is not what's happening. Some research that was done with students of color suggests that the social work curriculum keeps Eurocentric hegemony alive, promotes politics of difference that produces and reproduces social inequality. Another study that was done with Black graduates of predominantly white schools of social work suggests that race and racism education is actually often a minimal attempt at public appeasement, public relations or institutional appeasement, as opposed to widespread and meaningful curricular integration. The social work literature, there is tons of social work literature on pedagogy for teaching race and racism. I read a lot of it. Very little of it specifically addresses teaching race and racism to white social work students. What little there is mentions intense affect in response to race and racism content, white students pushing back, struggling with the content, denying it, maybe resisting it. There's also a little bit in the social work literature about the possibility of transformation. So the idea being that in learning about race and racism, white students might experience a revisioning of who they are, how racism structures our society, and develop a sense of need to continue to work against racism and structures of oppression. So, my research. Real quick about methodology. My research questions were, how are courses on race and racism being taught in graduate social work programs? How did the instructors of these courses perceive white student engagement with course material? And what might affect the ways that white students engage? It was exploratory research. This is because there's, again, very little in the social work literature about what this looks like in social work programs in classrooms. So I'm drawing on the first-hand experience of instructors to learn more about what's going on within the classroom. I use qualitative methods of non-probability propulsive sampling. I directly emailed professors and use some snowball techniques also. The requirement was only that they currently be teaching or have taught in the past an MSW course with significant content on race and racism, and I let them self-determine what significant content meant. So a lot of professors were teaching more general anti-oppression classes, not just race and racism classes. Semi-structured interviews, 45 to 60 minutes, some of them longer. These were just like absolutely fascinating. I loved the process of doing the interviews so much. And I'm so grateful that everyone was willing to talk to me. So, some of my findings. I interviewed 11 instructors. 3 were full-time tenure-track faculty, 8 were adjuncts or lecturers. About half identified as people of color, about half identified as white. I'm not getting more specific about their racial identities and other identity markers because one of the promises that I made around confidentiality was that I would only talk about those as they were relevant to the findings. So I'll bring it up as I'm going through, but I don't have like a specific breakdown. All of the people I interviewed have an MSW, 6 also have a PhD in social work or a related field. The ones who are adjuncts generally have other work that they do as well, so clinical work, consulting, training, nonprofit work, things like that. And they taught at a total of 13 schools. Many people taught at multiple schools at the same time or had taught at multiple schools in the past. Located around the country, but mostly in the Mid-Atlantic, which is where I live, and in the Northeast, which is where we all go to school. So again, this is not a representative sample. They had a cumulative total of more than 70 years of teaching experience. One of the things that was really striking in doing these interviews was how strongly motivated everyone I talked to was to teach race and racism content. So people talked about personal motivations, political motivations, professional motivations, said things like racism can be undone, we can unlearn it. Another professor said, I have a child of color who interfaces with social services. I want someone to treat my son like they're one of theirs. Another professor who's white identified talked about growing up, experiencing her parents' alcoholism and abuse, and feeling what it was like to be in a home that wasn't safe, and that helped her sort of bridge to having more of an empathic understanding of the ways that racism harms people. They have goals for students around this kind of transformation question. So instructors talked about wanting students to develop a commitment to lifelong learning, to work on race and racism issues from now until forever, and wanting students to take on accountability, so going from a place of expecting the instructor to teach to teaching themselves. In terms of how professors talk about framing when first to white students, I love this concept. So Professor C says that the course is an opening for growth, and you can either decide to sit in the fire and see what happens and what transformation can occur, or you can shut it down and you'll stay where you are. Professors talked about how much white students don't know about race and racism. So they talked about the way that U.S. history is taught in public schools, how we're taught a white-centric, white supremacist, sanitized version of history. They talked about how white students don't realize that we do have prejudice and that we grow up, those of us especially, I think, who identify as liberal or who identify as progressive, may grow up or may acquire an identity as non-racist. And one professor said that I think there's remedial work that needs to be done for some white students, just flat out. So I found 4 patterns of white student engagement with this course material. The first one I'm calling doing the work. What I mean by that is engaging in some way, opening themselves in some way, sitting in the fire, right? Being willing to experience some sort of transformation, even if there's fear, even if there's anger, even if there's pain or guilt or sadness. So this professor says more and more every year there are some students who are so thirsty for this, and that's a really beautiful thing. Some of those students are ones who I think are maybe bringing some analysis. Sometimes it's students where maybe they've had these emotions without knowing, almost an unconscious feeling about oppression. What's this about? What is it? But no language, and I think a sense of deep gratitude. For finally I have a way to talk to my family, or I have a way to understand what's happening. She also talked about a student who came into the class basically saying, I didn't know I was white until I just started this class, I just found that out. And that student actually really engaged and grew. Another kind of finding was that professors talked about how the learning continued after classes ended. So multiple professors talked about getting emails from students later on saying, oh, I just realized something, or something just clicked for me. So this professor says that they get a lot of emails from students saying, hey, I know I acted this way in your class, and now it's been a year, and I'm really sorry I did that. Things like that. And that was brought up by multiple people. The next category, so the rest are what I'm calling not doing the work. There's 3 of these. So one looks like really trying to seem non-racist, to put a lot of energy into performing what it looks like to not be racist, rather than engaging with ways that all white people have internalized white supremacy. So one professor said white students don't actually think about anything. They just say all these really nice things that social workers say about race. Another professor talked about students, I will say I recognize myself in this, who are very often white, very often used to getting her hand called on when she raises it, that maybe jump in too quickly and need to learn how to pull back, not defend all the time, not speak up for, and not white-explain for students of color in the class. Another professor talked about how white people who've had exposure to race and racism content can use it as a way to feel superior to other white people, and says that that actually contributes to brokenness. She also said, I think it's really easy for white students to write that person off rather than engage in, yeah, that's stuff I thought about too, or yeah, when I was growing up, I was told that. We write the person off instead. Another professor talked about the sort of tendency of white people and white social work students in particular to, when you come to some realization about racism, feel like, oh my god, I have to jump in and fix this. Like, I had no idea, and like, now I know, and there's so much urgency. And the way that recenters whiteness, it recenters white agency, it recenters white people as like the problem solvers. It's not actually an act of solidarity. Another category of not doing the work is what I'm calling just getting by, so people just trying to get through the bus. So that might look like people who are really interested in rules for how not to fuck up, how not to offend people, how not to say the wrong thing. Professor E described a student who is shutting down, who's not participating in class, who's sad a lot, doesn't know what to do with himself. He's saying, please let me not speak up in class because I don't know what to say. So again, sort of not putting themselves out there, not taking risks. This is hard for professors to experience because of how strongly motivated they are. If students don't care, it's really pretty painful in the way that a lot of people are talking about it. So one professor has students listen to the This American Life podcast about school segregation, and said when she has students listen to that, she wonders, how can you listen to it and not give a damn? You're in the wrong profession. Another category of not doing the work is what I'm calling pushing back or intense affect. This is sometimes referred to as resistance. And one of my participants suggested that it shouldn't be called resistance. It should be called sort of self-protectiveness because there's something that people are protecting in the pushing back. So I stopped using the term resistance after that. So resistance could be vocal, it could be overt, covert, conscious, unconscious. So again, we're seeing these habits of whiteness. It might look like eyes rolling, arms crossed, side conversation, no affect, resistance in papers, difficulty moving past marginalized identities to understand white privilege. Professor G talked about a class where people would say things like, I'm obese, so I know what it's like to be black. I'm Jewish, I know what it's like to be black. I'm not white. So again, refusing to connect with ways that being white gives them privilege, even while other intersectional aspects of identity are marginalized. So, a couple of implications. This work matters for white people. This professor says there's a lot of work we need to do as white people to understand our peoplehood with each other, our responsibility to each other to deconstruct what has been done to us by white supremacy. We've grown up in this system, we have internalized it down to our cores, and it hurts us. It hurts us in different ways than it hurts people of color, but whiteness hurts white people too. And this was really pretty evident in talking to the professors. This work matters for our classmates of color, who are really struggling often with being in classes with us. So Professor K talked about how the course is structured way too much for white students around white students' learning needs. Professor D said, folks of color in my class really need to have their experience centered. Queer people need to have their experiences centered. All of this needs to be centered in different contexts, in different settings, in different ways, at different times. But what happens is a lot of white people are in these classes, they've never been challenged, and they're in crisis. And so all of the attention goes to them. This work matters for social work. Again, I hope it's self-evident. But if it's not, Professor Z talked about how we're taking these perspectives out into the world, where we have real power over real people's lives, and this can be life and death. A lot of people talked about how white instructors need to work with white students. So white instructors talked about modeling what it looks like to make a mistake, to acknowledge it, to talk about it, to talk it through, or modeling what it looks like to be resilient. Professor F is a person of color and talked about feeling that pushing white students is not her responsibility, that it's the responsibility of white faculty members. And she says they're not doing that work. They're not visible doing that work. All the people who are pushing, questioning, some of the more origin types of questions that I pose for our field, that other faculty are posing, they're mostly folks of color. A lot of instructors, and this was really interesting to me, really stress that they need white students to mutually support each other in the classroom. People talked about having white students almost as co-instructors in sort of supporting their peers rather than resisting, rejecting, pushing them away, blaming, accusing. So Professor E says there are some students coming in at a 400 level. I'm just praying they can hang with it long enough to be able to gently guide another student so that that work isn't just on me. And there's students coming in, they're terrified, it's their first time, their defenses are up, and again, praying they can look around the room and see that their peers are not their enemies in that dynamic, that they're actually there to support each other, and that they're open to that. I found really clearly that the context shapes white student engagement. I have a whole thing about implicit and explicit curricula that I can talk more about with anyone who's interested in pedagogy stuff. But this comes up in a couple of different ways. So when Professor E talked about sort of the structures of capitalism and the pressures that puts on universities so that they're behaving more like businesses, and they're treating their students as consumers, and that interacts with white supremacy so that white students come in and are being told they're the customer is always right? They have the right to get the education that they want, that they're paying for, that we're paying for. And it kind of reinforces the pushback that tends to happen. A couple people brought up about Black Lives Matter and how the atmosphere in the classroom changed and the atmosphere on campus changed after that became part of this national media conversation in 2014. And Professor Kay also talked about how there was this kind of sense of hope and possibility that year, and then this year with Trump and the presidential election, that they were really feeling like people felt a sense of powerlessness, and that was tangible in the classroom. Implications. Schools need to assess and address institutional racism. Professor App says, schools committed to anti-racism should think about, from recruitment to admissions to field placement to core curriculum to faculty, etc., how to shift an entire institution, that institution being the school, around the question of what does upending white supremacy in this field look like. From a practice perspective, who do we admit? How much money do we give them? What does real access look like? What's the core curriculum focusing on? And when schools say, oh, we're already doing this, it's like, no, you're not. You're totally not. Because the school does not look anything like the community that you're serving. My conclusion, the strongest conclusion that I felt coming out of this, both personally and in terms of what my data was showing, is that white students need both remedial education and supportive accountability from their schools, from our schools, from the school. White students come in to programs lacking knowledge of race and racism. That's because of the ways that white supremacy operates. White students, when we face and encounter knowledge about race and racism, we put up all sorts of barriers. They operate in order to maintain white misunderstanding, misrepresentation, evasion, and self-deception, as I talked about earlier, that we need to be able to continue to operate as people doing violence in the world. We need to conceal from ourselves the extent of the violence that we're doing, and that that's showing up in classrooms, and that there need to be ways that schools are thinking creatively about recognizing that, working with it, addressing it, really pushing white students also in a way that feels possible, that feels safe enough and pushes enough so that there's this actual transformative learning that I think is possible, but that a lot of the time, I would say most of the time, is not happening in social work programs right now. So, I'm done.
I'm curious, like, if you had the opportunity or, like, if been invited to present this to anyone in the administration here?
I have not. This material.
It would be excellent.
My question is about documenting race, especially among white professors talking about racism. Did they talk also about any strategies or institutions or support spaces that they use to continue their own learning and their own accountability?
Yeah, a lot of people talked about needing to seek peer supervision kinds of things, and like needing to find friends, especially needing to find other white faculty who they can talk things through with. Yeah, so definitely that is something that everyone should be still paying attention to.
Do any of the professors you talked to have